Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome in from across the continent for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. I hope you're all obsessed with the moon right now. We're going around Artemis. We're on our way back to the Earth. It's a very exciting time in science and exploration, but we wanted to bring you back down to Earth for some really cool conservation storytelling in partnership with our friends at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. Now, many of you have joined us all week long, in which case, welcome back. We have done bats, we have done bees. It's been a wild ride. I think we've had like 1,600 kids between those two. I can't encourage you enough. Check out the Canadian Wildlife Federation website. Check out their National Wildlife Week festivities. There are posters, games, activities, all sorts of cool stuff to keep the learning going long after you are done our broadcast. But today, we're diving in literally and figuratively with one of my favorite creatures and one that we do not feature much here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Now, before I introduce Nick and our creature du jour, I want to note we do have a Kahoot today. So between our talk and our Q&A, if you want to play along with a little 4-question quiz to test some understanding and have some fun, you can pull up our game pin below, and we'll be getting to that in about 20-25 minutes. But as I hinted at vaguely, we've got Nick back joining us for, I think, the third or fourth time. He's becoming one of the most popular scientists we've ever had on. And today, he's going to talk about how we can feel like an eel. We've been doing animal senses all week long. We're going to talk about these incredible fish. A lot of people have a little weird feelings about eels, but we're going to highlight some of the misunderstandings, some of the coolest things about them. We're going to highlight how we can conserve them, and so much more. And so without further ado, I'm going to zip it. You're not here for me. Nick, welcome back to the broadcast, man. Thank you so much for joining, and take us away.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me again. And yeah, also one of my favorite creatures to talk about. And so we'll chat a little bit about their senses, about how, the really unique life history of the species, and then some of the conservation challenges that it faces, and some of the solutions that are out there. And so I'm going to talk today about the American eel, but this is one of the true eels, the anguillid eels. And these are a migratory species, so they move between freshwater and saltwater. And I think I have the terms for that later. But there are anguillid eels in most parts of the world. So here throughout Eastern North America, it's the anguillid eel. Throughout much of Europe and Northern Africa, there's the European eel. And you mentioned that there's a classroom here from Dubai. And so there's the short fin eel that is found along the eastern coast of Africa and the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Certainly in Oman, I don't know if they make it all the way around to Dubai, but very close to you. And these eels are all in the same genus. They're very closely related, and they're all globally connected to people and cultures through human history. So we talk about touch. Well, a lot of people might not want to touch an eel because they're slimy, and that is something that I can corroborate. They are one of the slimiest fish. They have very, very smooth skin, so they don't have big hard scales like many other fish, but they produce a lot of slime, second only to like lampreys and hagfishes that look a lot like eels but aren't. They're sometimes confused. A lamprey has that big sucker mouth, and it's a parasitic fish that is parasite on other fish. Long and thin like an eel, but not at all like an eel, aside from that. But it's very rare that you would ever touch an eel because unlike the saltwater eels, something like a moray eel that is known to be maybe dangerous or aggressive in defending their territories, if you dive, you might not want to go too close to a moray eel den. these freshwater eels are not like that at all. I don't know of any instance where an eel has ever bit a person. They are shy, they're reclusive, they like to hide, and they don't like to be touched. That's for sure. And so, because of that, you can see this eel sort of burrowing the back of its body down in there. They really do have a good sense of their surroundings, and even on uh, rainy days, particularly rainy nights, these animals are more active at night. Typically, they're nocturnal, and so they'll use their sense of touch in the dark, and they'll use their sense of touch to get up over land, to get around obstacles like waterfalls, as they complete their migration. So, very amazing creature. But the neat thing about giving a talk about the senses about fish is that fish don't just have five senses; they have another sense, a completely different sixth sense called through their lateral line. They can sense vibrations in the water. So this is kind of highlighted here, and I'll just go back to the other picture. You can see that line. And if you look closely at most pictures or drawings of fish, you can see that line very clearly. Um, so if you've learned about humans and hearing, you may have learned that inside our ears we have little pores with little hairs in them. I think they're called cilia. I'm not a human biologist, so I could be wrong on that. And that's how we hear when sound waves come into our ears. Those hairs vibrate, and that translates into our brain to sound. um, with eels and other fish in the water, they have little pores along that lateral line with little hairs in them, and they can sense vibration. And that sense is so keen. It's not something we can perceive, we can understand, but when they're in the water, they can feel their surroundings. This is one of the reasons that fish in aquariums don't know how to avoid the edge of it, because they can feel their movements moving through the water and bouncing off the glass towards them, so they know that glass is in front of them. And I've even seen, very healthy, completely blind fish. I saw a northern pike once that was swimming around completely blind, wasn't aware of my boat, but it was, its eye injuries were old and it was well fed, and that's likely because it can sense the movements of fish around them and still charge and still feed, still be effective. So fish have that cool sense. And when you talk about eels, you can even talk about a seventh sense that some fish have, and that's electroreception. And this is not a true eel, but obviously, whenever you talk about eels around kids, uh, people's attention goes to electric eels, which are much larger than American eels. They're found in the Amazon River basin, and they are not true eels. They're actually a knife fish, and all knife fish have really good electrical sensing abilities. Sharks do as well, and so they can sense electrical signals from other organisms. And of course, electric eels have this extra ability to be able to stun them. So all kinds of senses that fish have that other organisms that we can't understand, we can't experience, but we know they're able to sense and understand their environment differently than us. So yeah, these are some of the terms. So you have probably all heard about salmon. People talk about salmon that make these great migrations between the ocean and water. Those are anadromous fish, and eels are catadromous fish. And so these are two opposites. Both are diadromous fish. They migrate between freshwater and saltwater. But salmon spawn in freshwater and then migrate to the ocean. These anguillid eels, on the other hand, they spawn in saltwater. They spawn out in the ocean, and as babies, they migrate into freshwaters and up rivers, and then they grow and mature. And at the end of their life, they go back to the ocean. They make one last migration to spawn. And then the one other related term to that is there are some species like sturgeon that never go to the ocean but can make, well, some sturgeon do, but other species are purely freshwater. And so there's a lot of freshwater fish that can make very long distance migrations within freshwaters to reach their spawning location. And so eels have this life cycle, and I won't talk too much about it because I'm going to show on maps where this happens and how they change. But kind of like insects, they transform over their time, over their lives. They transform from their larval stage, which looks kind of like a leaf, into this translucent baby eel that's called a glass eel. As they get into fresh water, and that's when they start to darken, they get to this stage called an elver. And then that elver starts to grow into a yellow eel, and at the end of their life, that yellow eel will transform. Its eye will get bigger. Its yellow, brown, green color will transform to a silvery color, and that's as they prepare for their final migration back to the ocean. And so for American eel, you can see how widely distributed this species is. This is all one population. So all of these individuals might breed with each other over here in the Sargasso Sea near Bermuda. We don't know where. This is one of the great mysteries that remains, one of the great ecological, natural history, biological mysteries. No one has ever seen eels spawning, and we only know that they spawn somewhere in the Sargasso Sea because we see their larvae, their juveniles, these leptocephali, emerge around there. But from there, they might migrate all the way up to Greenland, all the way down to Venezuela, throughout the Caribbean, and throughout all of the rivers on the eastern seaboard of North America. So huge, wide distribution, and they can go super far inland, as far inland as where I am here in Ottawa and beyond in Ontario, Canada. And so that's a distance, a migration of about 3,500 kilometers that these fish make as juveniles. They start out as juveniles, and it might take them 3 to 5 years to reach where I am. So they're growing and transforming as they go. So they start out as these little, essentially they're plankton, they're larvae, they're drifting on ocean currents, they're eating other pieces of organic matter that are floating in the ocean, maybe small zooplankton. And as they start to reach the continental shelf, they transform into these little glass eels. And those will then start to migrate into freshwater. And some of them, as I mentioned, they can get out of the water. When these elvers are less than 10 centimeters long, so just a little thing like this, they have this ability to climb wet vertical surfaces, even a concrete wall. And here's a great picture of that. So these are amazing migrators. When they get any bigger than that, they can't cling to the wall. So you only see this near the coast where they're still in that small life stage, but they can get around a lot of different obstacles. And then as they start to move in and settle, and this is an area where I live, this is a dam. We'll talk about those a little later. This is sort of a medium-sized, this is the stage that they spend most of their life at. And the males tend to stay closer to the coast. They tend to mature in 5 to 7 years. The females are grow to be much larger, and they can take 20 years to mature in freshwater before they outmigrate. And so the eels that come the furthest inland, like to where we are, become these very large females. And they can weigh up to about 20 pounds, and they can carry as many as 20 million eggs. 20 million eggs in one individual large female eel. And if anyone has any questions about the differences between males and females, or maybe sort of a question for you to bring up at the end of the talk, is why you think those females are much larger and older and the males are smaller and younger when they do their final migration at the end of their life to go and spawn. So this is what one of those big silver eels looks like. And they'll make that return journey. They won't follow the same path because the juveniles have to drift on, those leptocephali have to drift on ocean currents, whereas the adults can take a more direct route to the Sargasso Sea. So I mentioned before, these eels like to hide, they're shy, they like to burrow. When I was a student doing grad school, I lived down in Virginia, and you could keep native fish as pets there. And one of the organisms I was studying was American eel, and I kept some in an aquarium in my living room. And I never saw them because they were always buried in the sand, just like that. And they probably came out at night when I was sleeping. So this is where you'll typically find eels during their yellow eel phase. And here's what they like to eat. They really like all of these little critters that are found in those rocks and crevices. The eels would love to go, in between big rock piles. And their number one favorite food where it's available is crayfish. They'll eat fish, but they can only eat smaller fish. They have a very small mouth. They can't bite fish in half, so they can't bite or eat any fish that's wider than their mouth is. They're not like snakes. They can't unhinge their jaw. So fish make up a part of their diet, but really these small invertebrates, crustaceans especially, are a huge part of their diet. And eels have always been extremely important to people, especially First Nations, Indigenous people in North America. Many of the different nations here have eel clans, much like you would have a wolf clan or a bear clan. They were a very fatty fish that would be in high abundance, and it is therefore, and you can smoke them, you can preserve them. So this was a really great high energy food that could be stored over the winter and carried for traveling. They were so important that in Mi'kmaq cultures, and because of that fat content, the eel broth was a great first food to give to babies, because it's just like breast milk, which has high fat content. So does that eel broth. And then at the end of life, to close that loop, it was a comforting food to give as a last meal to elders. And meanwhile, the skin itself, because the eel skins will shrink when they dry and then expand when you wet them again. So what a perfect tool making thing to do as a bandage, or to wrap the head of an axe onto a piece of wood, because you can wet it, expand it, wrap it on, and it will shrink and tighten and dry afterwards. And then, of course, they were also and continue to be important commercial fisheries. And if you've ever gone for sushi, you may have had unagi. And unagi is a grilled eel with a sauce on it. Well, unagi is the Japanese word for eel. And this would be a freshwater eel and not a moray eel or an electric eel. So getting into some of the conservation challenges, there's a real challenge around those elvers, or those glass eel fisheries, because of habitat loss and overfishing. European eels have declined quite a bit, and as of 2007, there were some laws put in place to protect the commercial harvest of those European eels. And ever since that time, the demand for eels for things like sushi has gone up, to the point where these small elvers can be among the most expensive wildlife per pound in the world, getting prices some years as high as $5,000 per kilogram. So just a little thing of eels this big would be worth $5,000. And that's because, like many other fish, we raise eels from small individuals down into large individuals in aquaculture to sell them for food. But unlike many other fish, we don't know how to breed eels in aquaculture. So the only way that we can raise eels in aquaculture is to get them as young juveniles to begin with. Um, and so in Eastern Canada, this has led to some major conflicts, because there's a lot of this illegal, unreported harvesting. There's a black market for eels. There's the involvement of organized crime. And this happens at night over many different rivers over a wide area, and there's very little enforcement of it. So this is a big conservation challenge that we're facing. Another big conservation challenge that we face with eels is particularly habitat loss from fragmentation by dams primarily, but also small things like road crossings where there's a culvert that eels can't get around. They're really good at climbing, around sets of rapids and getting up on land on wet days, but that's a lot harder to do around a massive dam in a place where there's a lot of human infrastructure around the waters, while there's not sort of a natural slope for them to clearly get around an obstacle like this. And so, because of the number of dams that we've built, there's a huge part of their range where American eels can no longer even get to their habitat, so they can't reach it in the first place. If there are hydro dams where eels can get around them, whether it's because there's an eel ladder, and I'll show those a bit later, or because they find a way to sneak through or around, or they find some way that we don't understand. They can live quite happily in that habitat upstream. They don't have a lot of competition. They'll grow quickly, but at the end of the life, they have to come back down the river, and they tend to follow the flow, which means they tend to go through the turbines, and they can get killed. They can get cut in half. They can get hit by those turbines. And so what we've seen in the freshwater parts of their range, where there have been a lot of barriers put in place, is we've seen declines of over 99%, or the complete loss of eels from those habitats in many parts of their range. In other parts, across the species, this is not an endangered species. At least in Canada, I think internationally it's considered endangered, whereas European eel is critically endangered. American eel are maybe more threatened, because along the coast, in areas that they can still access, there are still at least moderately abundant populations. So their decline has not been 99% across their entire range, just in parts of it, many parts of it. And so this is a challenge of cumulative effects. So here's this, again, mentioning in Ottawa, you can see this is just some of the dams that American eels face in this watershed. And so to get into the watershed, they have to get past one major dam that doesn't have any passage. And in the lower part of the watershed, where there are still some eels present, there are four major dams that break that up. So each one, maybe, we don't really know, but maybe 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 eels gets past each one of those. And so the further upstream you go, the smaller the population is. And then there's further dams on all the other side rivers, because this is a major river system. So even the tributaries to it are pretty significant. And the majority of those tributaries also have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dams along their reaches. So essentially, there are no American eels in big parts of this watershed where historically they would have been. So some of the work that we do is around research. We work with universities and other partners to track eel movements to better understand how they interact with dams, where they pass, what their survival rate is when they move downstream. And we often do this by tagging eels and tracking their behavior. This is an example of an acoustic tag. And we can also use pit tags, which are so this tag transmits a beep underwater that gets detected by these receivers wherever we deploy them. Here, what we're doing is we're inserting a pit tag, which is the kind of tag that you might put in a cat or a dog to identify that individual. And for these, you have to recapture that eel and scan it with a wand up close, and you'll be able to identify it. Whereas for these, if a eel has one of these tags in them, if they swim anywhere close to where you have a receiver within about 500 meters or so, you would detect that eel. We've also done some catch and release research to better understand how well eels do if you catch one by accident. In Ontario, you're not allowed to fish for eels, and you have to release one right away. And we wanted to better understand, is it better to take the hook out of that eel, or is it better to cut the line? And so we did some experimenting by deliberately hooking these eels and leaving them in a tank for 7 days, both shallow hooks like this or deeper hooks. We took some of the hooks out, we cut the lines. And what was amazing is over that 7-day period, not only was survival extremely high, I think 100%, if not 100% close to it, of the eels that had these hooks survive, even if the hook was left in. But when you left the hook in that eel and cut the line, something like 90% of the ones that had it hooked like this would shed that hook by themselves within a week. And even something like 70% of those that had a deep hook were able to shed it. And so from there, we were able to give some guidance to anglers if they happen to catch an eel, what should you do? And basically, if you can take the hook out, take it out. If not, cut the line, and you can trust that that eel has a really good chance of making it and surviving. So what else is being done? Well, there are these eel ladders, and these eel ladders allow young eels to pass upstream. And you can see this sort of looks like a little plinko board. So what the eel does is it can squirm back and forth between these and climb all the way up. They could climb 100 meters high through a long angled ladder like this and get over the dam and come out the other side. This is sort of a peek at the inside of that ladder. Or you can have a little temporary eel ladder trap like this if you're trying to figure out where eels are or what parts of the dam they're approaching, where they would climb up here and then end up in this collection bag on the other side. And the same sort of board with all these tubes would be found underneath this wood here. To date, unfortunately, there's very few dams that have these ladders. But that is an pretty easy way, and compared to some of the other fish ladders that are out there, an inexpensive way of getting eels around dams. Unfortunately, those other fish ladders that typically exist that salmon might use don't work very well for eels, and these eel ladders don't work really well for other species. And that's one of those questions that we can leave for the end and see if anyone has any ideas as to why. The other really neat thing that is being designed and tested now that has a lot of promise is these fish-friendly turbines. And so if you remember that picture that I showed you earlier that looked like a fan with a bunch of blades on it and the eels that were jammed in there and stuck or cut by them. One of the biggest issues is that these turbines, the runners inside the turbine, which is basically this propeller, this is a slightly different design that looks more like a boat propeller. They're the ones that cause all the damage, and they still look like they did when hydropower was first invented 130 years ago. But what one engineering company realized was, if at the end of that propeller blade, you don't make it sharp like a knife, but you make it round like an oval, then the water and fish like eels will more often get bumped by it or pushed or slid around it rather than getting cut by it or pinched by it. And so they've been able to see that, at some of these turbines in operation right now, we know that they can kill between 15 and 15% of the eels that encounter them, whereas this new design can kill less than 2%, sometimes less than 1%. So that's a really promising solution for the future. And I will leave it at that so that we have lots of time for questions and your Kahoot quiz, and we'll chat more then.
Let's dive in. Nick, thank you so much for the deep dive on eels. We already have so many questions in the chat. You guys are an amazing YouTube audience, and I can't wait for the ones on the StreamYard as well. As you alluded to, we are going to begin with our Kahoot, see who is paying attention, have a little bit of fun. Now, I want to note as we dive in with this, the faster you answer, the more points you get. What you win is Nick and I's everlasting respect. And I also want to note, I said this before we went live, we have today someone who yesterday got 4,000 out of a possible 4,000 in the Kahoot, the all-time record. So there's big shoes to fill. We'll see if we can update that again and maybe get the same score this time, or have someone match it from another class. But let's dive in and get underway. Here we go. And if you want to help us with any hints along the way, by all means, you can chime in and give us some assistance. But in one more second, we get underway with question 1. The organ eels use to feel water vibrations with is called the what? The ampullae of Lorenzini, the lateral line, the vomeronasal organ, or the vibratometer? Dun, 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 dun. I got to sneak in some other names of cool organs that other animals have in this. I noted your appreciation to it, Nick.
And the ampullae of Lorenzini is what sharks use to sense electricity.
It is, and it's so cool.
I should have waited until the full quiz was up, but yeah, good name.
Not perfect. Lateral line. Most of you got this right. Way to go, everybody. Okay, let's see what we got. Wise eels in the lead. Oh my gosh, you got an eel name. Okay, well, I hope that's the winner because that's awesome. A young eel, a juvenile eel, is called a what? Is it an eeliti, a noodle, an elver, or a lee? Like eel backwards. What do we think? I tried to make this fairly goofy so that you would all get it. It's one of my favorite names in nature because it sounds like something out of like a Lord of the Rings book, and just makes me happy. So let's see what we've got. 35 answers in so far.
It's also one of my favorite French words. It's civelle, which is a very nice version of the English, not version, just alternative to. So
we mixed up everyone. The elite, we nabbed everyone. Elver is correct. Ooh, at the beginning we had this. Throws off our leaderboard entirely. Legend B takes our lead, our animal from yesterday. Okay, some eels migrate between salt and fresh water. Is this true or false? We talked about this. We had some cool fancy science terms. I will say too, when we go to Q&A, it's going to be Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Hancock, Ms. Huisman's class, and Miss McAdam, and then YouTubers keep sharing there as well. But Nick, you covered this quite a bit. This is pretty cool stuff. Let's see what they got. All right. One more second. Yes, that's true. And I want to stress that's really rare. Like most fish, most creatures cannot go between one and the other. They are really radically different environments. It'd be like you standing outside shirtless in the Arctic and then going to like the desert. Like it's a really totally different kind of environment. So eels have some pretty cool adaptations to survive it. All right. Wise eel back 5th place. Legend B keeps our lead. This is very exciting. Okay. This is a multi-select. There's more than one right answer. What are 2 solutions we discussed to help eels? Are they teaching eels to just stay in the sea, fish-friendly turbines, eel ladders, or eel trampolines, which might not be real, but also I really want to see what that would look like. I like this picture of how many there are in the tubes.
It'd be hard to get 1,000 points on this to pick 2 within 1 second.
Fish-friendly turbines, eel ladders. You guys nailed it. Way to go. Okay, let's see what we've got. I don't think anyone got 4,000, but I love your effort. Legend B is 3rd. All right, 2nd place is Incredible Moose. And first, for all the marbles, is... All right, it's Jolly Ostrich. Whoever you are, let us know who you are in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. But we are going to dive in with questions now for the next 10, 15 minutes. So, Mrs. Fisher's class, come on in Carsonville. If you guys have a query to kick us off, you are good to go. Hi. Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
If can eels like go through vents and stuff and get into sewer systems?
They can go through almost anything, and we think maybe they can go through like cracks and fissures in the rocks. I don't think they would go into a sewage system, but maybe if there are parts of city infrastructure that have rain sewers, especially if those rain sewers would connect to another water body upstream, I think it's very possible that eels would end up using that as a passageway if it exists. So I would never underestimate what eels can get themselves into.
Animals in general have an uncanny knack for getting where we might not necessarily want them in our physical infrastructure. But sewage is in the same way that you don't want to go jump in a punch of sewage. Neither do the eel. They understand that's a pretty gross environment as well.
I will say there's no chance that an eel is ever going to make its way through the pipes into your house or a building and show up in a toilet. I've never heard. You hear some stories about that with snakes. I have never heard of an eel doing that. So nothing to worry about there.
I will keep that in mind in my second floor house in Newfoundland. No eels popping up through the pipe. Mr. Hancock's class, if you guys want to come on in, you are good to go. Hey.
Can you hear us loud and clear?
Yeah, you're great, man.
Okay, good. Perfect. One of my students was wondering how old can they get, and what is the oldest eel you've ever interacted with?
Well, I don't know personally what the oldest eel is. The only way we can tell how old an eel is if we have a dead eel. We can take out what's called their otoliths. So the way their ears work, and most, if not all fish, they have a little stone that floats inside, not a stone, a little bone that floats inside their head in liquid, and the vibration against that is what gives them hearing. And just like a tree ring, the way that grows is each year when they grow fast in the summer and slow in the winter, there are rings on that otolith. With eels, with some fish, you can really tell this is a 5-year-old fish, this is a 2-year-old fish, because you can count 2 rings or 5 rings. With eels, they're very hard to read those rings. Their growth isn't that consistent. So I've seen results come back of otoliths from the Ottawa River that were almost 50 years old.
Wow.
I'm not sure to believe that, but I've also heard stories about European eels that maybe got caught in a well or in a lake that only empties to the ocean when there's a big flood, and that some of those eels might be 80 years old, and they just sort of are waiting for their chance to get reconnected to get back out to the sea.
Wow.
But generally a big female eel would outmigrate after at the age of anywhere from about 12 to 25 years.
Yeah. Great detailed answer, man. And I put otolith in the chat for everyone because it's a really cool thing. It's one of my favorite things to bring up in fish programs. Very, very cool. Mr. Adam, Kingston, if you guys want to unmute your mic, come on in and take us away. Hey, guys. Hello.
Do eels hibernate?
Yeah, it's a good question. So fish don't hibernate like mammals and some birds, I guess, certainly mammals and some amphibians do. A true hibernation would be where the body shuts down, like a groundhog, right? A groundhog, it might breathe once a minute. Its heart might beat once every 30 seconds or so when it's hibernating. You could take that groundhog out of the ground when it was hibernating and like bonk it against the tree. It would be stiff as a board. It would not respond at all. And so eels don't do that, but eels do. They're much less active in the winter, and they'll tend to burrow in the sediment. And Mi'kmaq people, and I've gone and I've worked with one of the elders who's shown how he does this. They would ice fish for eels by cutting a hole in the ice with a big long spear. Think of it as a spear that's like as tall as your house, and they would poke it into the mud all around. And every now and then, as you're poking, you would hit an eel that is spending the winter down in the mud like that. And that's how they would harvest eels during the winter. So they have it's not a full hibernation, but it's very similar to a hibernation.
We had spears in that story. We had the word bonk thrown in for packaging something into something. That was a fantastic answer, Nick. I love it. We're going to go back to our live classes in just a minute. We've got so many questions on YouTube, so I want to take some of theirs. Quick, easy one. Someone wanted to know if you would classify yourself as an ichthyologist. Yes?
I would, yes. That's a That's what you call a fish biologist.
Fish biologist, ornithology is birds, mammalogy is mammals. There's all sorts of cool things. Check out the ologies if you're keen on more. So since that was really fast, Winnie also wants to know, are eels omnivores?
I don't know of eels eating plants. I guess the closest would be where they, as leptocephali, where they would eat that that marine snow, that sort of organic matter that was there. But no, I would describe eels as carnivores, like many other fish species, and not just as piscivores because they eat a lot of those invertebrates and crayfish. Piscivore would really focus on just eating fish.
Yeah, great answer. All right, we're getting so many great questions. Okay, I'm scrolling through. Miss Roberts' class wants to know how fast they swim if they're migrating so far. You talked about them taking years to cross ocean bases, but is there are they lightning fast or very slow?
Top of head, the best answer I think is as they're moving downstream to outmigrate to the ocean, and they've got that river current behind them. I think they cover about 50 kilometers a day. So it can take many weeks for them to travel, thousands of kilometers downriver and across the ocean.
Still though, 50, that's more than I could cover in a day. I've done a marathon and I just collapsed on the couch after that, and that's 42 kilometers. So cool. Awesome, man. Let's head back to Mrs. Fisher's class. We got a kid right at the camera. Come on in. Hey.
Hi. Is there any rare eels?
Yeah, so I think what rare, that goes to that population status. And so European eels would be rarer than North American eels or than American eels because they're considered critically endangered. So their populations are so low that today they're considered rare, but historically they wouldn't have been.
I love when we get conservation questions. Thank you so much for asking these sorts of things, guys. They're great. Mr. Hancock, come on in. Take us away with number 2. Hey.
Just a second ago, you said marine snow. Can you explain what marine snow is? I don't think those two words go together.
Yeah, sure. So it kind of looks like snow if you put a camera under the water and it lights up and it reflects off the little particles. So if you've ever been in a lake or in the ocean, you've kind of seen that, like, there's just looks like there's a lot of little stuff floating around in the ocean. That's what that would be. I remember first hearing about that when I started to learn about like the deep ocean, right? Like anything where it's black and you have all those deep sea creatures, and that's a lot of what they feed off of. And so what that is that's just sort of like broken down organic matter. So dead plants, animals, single cell organisms, all that little stuff that you see floating around that just has nutrients in it. And that's what those little larval eels will start to eat when they're super tiny.
The equivalent in your house, and this is going to be really gross for a lot of you because I don't think many kids know this. So when you like run your hand along your counter, there's all sorts of dust. There's dust on my bookshelves. A lot of that is human skin. So your skin flakes off all the time, and that makes up a significant fraction of the dust in your house. So if that was in the ocean, that would be marine snow. Things would eat that. They'd be like, ooh, little bunch of skin. How great is that? Delicious. There you go. Here's your freaky thing for the day, everybody. Miss McAdams' class, we're coming back to you, and then we'll take a few from our YouTube friends before we wrap up. So Kingston, come on in. Hey.
How do eels get the hook off them?
I don't entirely know. I know a lot of fish will do that. It's actually kind of a good practice if you're ever fishing and fish is hooked deep or you can't get the hook out. It's better to just cut the line than to try to like tear it out or anything. But what I have seen eels do, I've caught a couple while I was out fishing in different places. And I've seen them wrap their body around and almost like climb up the fishing line and then pull their body down over that. So they might try to get it like wedged into, the rock or something like that and pull against it, or they might try to like wedge their body around for it to slip out. But that would have been, that's an interesting question. It would have been neat for us to try to take some video of them and see one of them shedding the hook and figure out how they do that.
Yeah, Nick, we missed your eel demonstration. Could you show us what being an eel is like again? Yeah, just like a little. Okay, cool. Okay, everyone can be an eel in their class later.
It is impossible to hold an eel if you don't have if that eel isn't anesthetized and unconscious, or you don't have some kind of hard gloves, and then you might be holding that eel like this. If you've ever tried to hold, I don't know, like a hellbender reptile or something like that, that's hard to hold on to, but they got little legs and they can push through. Eels, or that you can kind of hold along your legs. Eels don't have any legs; they just slip through. You can't hold it. Slippery like an eel is not that term exists for a reason.
Nick, the nerdiest thing I've heard in years in this program is that your default for like an animal that's kind of like eel-like is hellbender. That's where your mind went. Thank you so much for that in my day. They're the coolest salamander. Everyone should look up a hellbender. They rock.
Or a mud puppy around here.
Oh, good. Oh,
yeah.
man, even that. Huh. Okay, 2 more from YouTube. I know we could go all day. We have more questions than we could possibly take in a broadcast. You can email extras to us, and we'll try and take more after the show is done. Let's see. Elena. Hi, Elena. Welcome back. She wants to know if all species of eel go through the same life cycle that you showed at the beginning.
All of the anguillid eels do. So I think there's about, I don't know, 16 to 19 that are found in different parts of the world. Like in Australia and New Zealand, there's short fin, long fin eels. And every one of those species in that genus goes through that. The eels that don't have that life cycle that are purely marine would be those the marine eels like a moray eel, and those are purely saltwater fish. They're reef fish, and they have a different kind. Or there's deep sea eels like gulper eels, but they're not closely related to these freshwater eels. So this is a very specific group of ancient fish. There's only that one genus, and they all have that life cycle.
So the fact that you mentioned a whole bunch of different eels was great leading into our final question. I also want to encourage everybody to look up a gulper eel because it'll change your life forever. If you think the thing, people are like, oh, aliens, how cool would they be? Look at some deep sea creatures and tell me that those aren't as alien as we're ever going to find. It's so, so cool. Great question from Ife in grade 6. They want to know, why do some animals have eel in their name if they're not an eel, Nick? It sounds crazy. These electric eels and other things. It's so wild.
Yeah, so when we say not an eel, this is the common name and the scientific name, right? So you have that, or that Latin name, the Anguilla rostrata, which is the scientific name for American eel. So there's a lot of common names that overlap and that don't necessarily point to that, the evolutionary history. Where did these come from? How related are these organisms? So those Latin names tend to point to that and tend to classify organisms based on where they came from, how they evolved, what they're related to. Common names can just be a little more descriptive. So just because an electric eel in the Amazon has the same body shape as an American eel, it doesn't evolve from the same roots as American eel did. It's called convergent evolution. So these two organisms became similar to each other through different pathways, and they look similar, so they have a similar common name, but they don't have the same actual sort of classification scientifically.
Nick, just because you're a fan of Latin names and you pepper them in, I just want to note, when I was the age of some of our older students, I had this book and I learned all the shark Latin names, and I had my mom quiz me on them, and I can still recite like 20, 30 shark Latin names, and it's very fun. It's very nerdy, but if you're super keen like Nick and I are, it's a very fun pastime to learn some extra names, and you get a cool sense of some animal relationships from that. This has been so much fun. Time flies when you're having fun. And so we are nearing the end of the broadcast. I want to encourage all our classes. Helptheeels.ca is Canadian Wildlife Federation's site for eel conservation info and more. It's amazing stuff there. The National Wildlife Week series is here. Everything's on our YouTube channel, including this one. So please share with your family and friends and pass along extra questions to us. But Nick, before we bring in all our kids to say a big thank you and farewell, is there a final message on eels you want to leave us with today?
These are all great questions, and as many answers as I've given, I think more than any other organism I know, there's more that we don't know about eels than that we do know. They're very, very mysterious. They're very challenging to study, and there's way, way more to discover. We've even, got videos now of giant squids, which when I was a kid, we'd never seen alive, and we've never seen eels spawn, and that's just one of those mysteries. So.
We still don't know where blue whales have their babies, the biggest animals to ever exist on this planet. We do not know where they have their young, and that is wild. So if you are kids and you are excited like Nick and I about nature, you can go become a biologist, an ichthyologist. You can learn so much about some of the most incredible creatures we share this planet with. It's one of my very favorite messages. So thank you for your passion and expertise. I'm going to bring in our remaining classes to say a big thank you and farewell. And if you're on YouTube and you want to scream and yell, please do. But Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Hancock,